All right, Kiran, say hi to everyone.
Hello, and thank you for having me, Jim.
Yeah, happy to have you here. So I'm sure everyone's wondering, what it is that you guys do over at Tydy. Maybe let's start there and talk a little bit about your journey.
Sure. At Tydy, we do something very, very simple, which is we work with businesses to connect their employee data to automate onboarding, transitions, and offboarding. Fundamentally, the thesis that we went behind was with the increasing number of systems in an organization, employee data sits in silos, and there was a need for a product to come in and tie all of it together and really build that cohesive, unified profile of the individual. And so that's what we do at Tidy.
So is that everything from onboarding to offboarding and kind of everything in between?
Yeah, so while you would still have your HR systems, you'd have your IT help desk, your payroll, your financial systems, expense management, learning. So we tie all of those systems together to kind of give a single view of the individual and then automate the data flow across all of these systems.
And I see on your website you're calling it people ops, which
Yeah.
is a newer term to the world. But maybe just talk a little bit about what people ops is and why that's important to your situation.
Yeah. HR has fundamentally been something that has started through the industrial age. And I think, unfortunately, through the years, with more and more complexity coming into our workplace, HR has had to do a lot of administrative and operational work. But people ops is that one new kind of space which is developing where you kind of have the merge of HR and IT. So where there's a lot more of I would say technical, a lot more of systems coming into play in order to deliver the best experience. So it's no longer just your traditional HR processes, but how do you kind of build a techno functional role, and that's what people ops is all about.
Yeah, it's funny. I when I think about people, right? It's a business is all about the people, people first, employees, they
Yeah.
take care of your customers, so on and so forth, right? This term people ops, I think, is not only so innovative, but so important for people to recognize that this is the direction that everything in a business is moving towards, right? Like kind of like
Yeah.
revenue ops. Revenue is no
Correct.
longer about sales or sales and marketing. It's about tying together the revenue of the business from sales to operations, right? Same thing with
Right.
people. So I love this. I love this concept. Is this something that you guys have created? Is this a well-known industry term? Talk to me about that.
It's getting there.
Good.
I think it's fairly in its infancy stage as well. I think there's been just so much of proliferation of SaaS apps and technology coming into the employee experience, especially post COVID and with the whole hybrid workforce and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of I would say a lot of that kind of coming in and building into the yeah.
Got it. So maybe not as far as RevOps or DevOps, but starting to catch on from a lingo perspective.
Yep.
Okay, got it. So when you started Tidy, I mean, obviously it's been a few years, and I wanna go back to that in a second. Compared to today, how has your vision for what you've been building evolved?
um I think we've actually moved more towards the IT side of the world than the HR side of the world. That's what's kind of happened from a deployment perspective as well, where we're now partnering not just with the CHRO but also with the CIO within the organizations to ensure employee data is secure, is meeting all the requirements from a privacy perspective, is meeting all the requirements from a scalability and security perspective. So we're starting to see the need to kind of partner with not just the HR organization but with the CIO organization as well within businesses.
And what are the size of these businesses that you're serving? I mean, I know you've got some big customers, some of which are on your website, some which aren't. But what's the general size of organizations you're serving?
Yeah, so we traditionally service organizations with about 5,000 plus employees. On average, we do have some really large businesses that we work with. 100,000 plus people, 40 plus countries. So we have a pretty wide geographic spread as well.
Got it. What have been some of the, call them challenges, trials, tribulations, the dirt is kind of what I like to call it. But what are some of the things that you faced and overcome in growing Tydy's people ops platform? And not just on the product side, just in general in the business.
Yeah, I think what we did, which was very different from your traditional kind of startup route, is we started by going after enterprise. We started by going after larger businesses. And I think that in itself is a challenge when you have some sort of track record, but when you don't, then it becomes an even bigger challenge. The reason we did that, though, is from a product perspective, what we built was built for an organization that had complexity with systems and locations and multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was important we went after larger enterprises up front. That was a huge challenge to try and overcome. One of the ways we actually did that is we're US headquartered operations in the US. We have a dev team in India. One of the ways we actually found a hack was to try and actually hit some of the, I would say, the innovation centers of some of the large organizations which were based in Asia, and to try and showcase value over there before we kind of built it into a global agreement, right? So when you're going after an enterprise, it's almost impossible to hit the ground running and get a global agreement upfront on day one. So the idea is always to kind of show value, which will then build a case internally to kind of then be able to deploy across the globe. So I think that was one of the big challenges that we faced early on, and one of the hacks that we found to try and actually get around it.
So are you guys typically having to sell through procurement as well, or
Oh yeah,
okay?
oh
And
yeah.
what's that? I mean, some people listening might be like, "Oh, what is procurement? I've never heard of that." But what does that look like, and how does that shift the way that you guys need to sell and involve stakeholders?
Yeah, so when you're selling into an enterprise, you're not just selling to the functional head who is either the sponsor or the main user or the user group of the product. In our case, there would be HR, who's the main user group within the product. You would have the CIO team who has to also give a okay and kind of go through due diligence. And then once you complete that, so it's not just one person buying, it's a group of people who you have to convince. Once you complete that, you kind of move into procurement stage. And procurement is the centralization of all purchasing activities within the enterprise. So whether it's software to stationery to whatever it may be, there's a procurement team in enterprises who will basically come in and try and ensure that the organization gets the best possible deal. Um, so what we do with procurement is in our process, it's usually one of the last processes before the contract gets signed. It is traditionally a stage where you will get negotiated down. You do have to account for that when you go into enterprise sales. There is always a certain percentage that you're looking at, which you will have to give procurement as a discount before you kind of move ahead. And so yeah, we just treat it as part of the process.
Got it, got it. And I I love the tone of the conversation as we start to talk about enterprise sales, right? Because I think a lot of
Right.
founders out there are like, "Wow, I've never done this whole thing called sales, but I'm having to be a big part of it, if not the primary driver of it, right?" So, like, how is your enterprise sales background? And feel free to give details on that if you'd like. How has that helped
Sure.
you as a founder? And what are some of the things that you've learned from an enterprise environment to, now smaller company, a little bit different?
Yeah, no, a little bit different for sure. So prior to starting Tydy, I have about 17 or 18 years of enterprise sales. So I've been doing this for a while, and you kind of start understanding the process. No matter what you're selling, there's always a process. There's always, as I said, multiple teams that you're talking to. There's procurement, there's contract due diligence. There are certain specific steps that you need to kind of go through from an enterprise sales perspective. I think the big difference for me with Tydy was, it was for the first time that I was actually selling a product that had no history and that had no sort of no name behind it, right? Because as a startup, you're an absolute nobody. So the process of selling was slightly different because during the early years, it was very much solution oriented. So, we want to go and solve this problem, but was it onboarding that stuck? Was it employee data management that stuck? So there was a lot of experimentation that kind of went through the process from a sales perspective. But I think the big difference selling to enterprise versus SMB or mid market is with the enterprise, you're focusing a lot on organizational value and ROI. It's not just about what the HR team will get, for example, in our case. It's also about what the managers would get, what the IT teams would get, what the admin teams would get with automation of people ops. So I think it's a much bigger kind of value proposition that you need to have when you're selling into enterprise. Obviously, you need to have the check marks, which are your security and scalability. You need to be able to prove that. Very often, they would kind of also do due diligence on your platform to understand if you actually have it or you're just saying it. So those are the kind of steps that would differ from traditional enterprise sales versus enterprise sales as a startup.
Yeah, no, you hit on some key points I want to pull out of there. So, um, typical sales cycle for a startup isn't really ever typical compared to a larger company, right? So what does that look like as you've grown from zero, in your first enterprise customer to today? Like, what does that look like, and how has that evolved in terms of the sales process and in general, the length of the sale?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So when we started, we were taking about 5 to 6 months to close a deal. Now that's not the most atrocious number.
Not
It's
at all.
already a pretty optimized number, but that's because I could prep ourselves for what would be expected from an enterprise sales perspective. I think most other founders that I speak to who have zero enterprise sales experience, you're starting from zero and trying to figure out the process as you go because you've never done it before. But I think the advantage I had was I started at probably 40 or 50% because I knew what was coming up. I think the big optimization for us was you need to have talking points and you need to have collateral at each stage. And what I mean by that is things like when a company goes into due diligence to understand whether your product can meet their requirements, they're looking for technical architecture, data flow. They're looking at the server setup. Do you have disaster recovery in place? Do you have all of those kind of things set up? And during the initial days when we were selling, a lot of that was still something we were figuring out. So we didn't have specific documents about it. We were kind of, building the airplane as we fell, kind of thing. So I think that took us some time, even though we knew what the process was. But cut short to today, our sales process is anywhere between 3 to 4 months to close, 100K deal plus
Well,
per year. So yeah, it's fairly optimized at this point.
yeah, for those of you listening, 3 to 4 months for an enterprise sale being a relatively small company. You guys have obviously
Yeah,
grown well above 50 people or so now, but not a 5,000 person company yet.
right. Yeah.
So it's that short time frame takes some mastery of not only enterprise sales, but of the value to the customer, right?
Hmm.
And to your point, Kiran, that value is not just to the buyer. That value is not
Right.
just to the user. That value is to a series of stakeholders over the organization, right?
Yeah.
For you, you've mentioned yours, but for others, it might, include, any executive, any mid-level manager, and oftentimes like lots of users and influencers along the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main ones that you need to kind of worry about are your gatekeepers. And you need to kind of identify for your product who those gatekeepers are. They're not necessarily the guys who are buying you. They're not necessarily the ones who would potentially use you 24/7 on a daily basis, but they're the gatekeepers who will influence whether your deal goes through or not. In our case, a lot of that is, for example, it's the CIO organization. It is potentially even from procurement is definitely a gatekeeper for everyone. It is
Oh yeah.
because they can make your life hell. But
Absolutely.
I think other than that, you need to find who that other gatekeeper is within your sales process.
Who's your gatekeeper?
In our case, it's usually the CIO organization. Yeah. So it's
Oh, I
it's
meant it
usually
tidy. I meant it tidy.
at Tydy. I'm usually gatekeeper.
Yeah, you're at that stage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh man, that's good. So for you though, it's usually you were saying it's usually the CIO at your customer is usually
Yeah,
the gatekeeper.
yeah, that's
Why
right.
is that?
Um, because we're such a technology optimized product and we're touching so many different systems within the organization. While the CIO is tasked with delivering a great experience from a technology and information systems perspective, that also means he or she needs to kind of account for any new piece of software coming into the system. And primarily because our product integrates with so many of them internally, it does become a pretty big, I would say, focal point for the CIO within the organization.
So are you then integrating with CRMs, ERPs, anything
Yeah.
else across or like across the board, like ServiceNow, for
Yep.
instance?
Yeah. So your ServiceNows is IT help desk, HR systems like Oracle and
Yeah.
Workday, payroll systems and vendors like ADP or Paychecks, potentially with identity management systems like Okta and, ADFS. So multiple systems that we're integrating and kind of bringing together from an employee data perspective.
So is this then an open API play for all those integrations, or are you having to do actual hard integrations?
So that's a really interesting question because when you go into enterprise, there's nothing called open API. You might have APIs available, but every single enterprise has a very different data structure. They might be using Oracle, three of them using the same Oracle product or the same Workday product or the same ADP product, but their nuances are so custom that the data structure within each one of these systems is going to be very different. And so we love it when there are APIs, but there's always a certain amount of custom, build that you have to bring in.
Always, and therein why I asked the
Always.
question. Always. Legacy systems are the opposite of open API
Oh
opportunity.
yeah. Oh, we've done integrations with legacy systems, and some of the integrations that we've done, oh my God, is incredible how we even managed to get data out of it or push back into it. So yeah.
So let's talk about data for a second. What are the core value elements that you guys see in data, whether that be internal or as a potential business model for you guys down the line?
So I think data for us is the core of everything we do, and I think one thing most people don't realize is you and I give more data about ourselves to our employers than we do to any other service. Whether it's the bank or whether it's Amazon or Netflix or whatever it is, you're giving a very limited amount of information about yourself. But when you think about what you're giving your employer, you're giving your entire work history, your educational experience, your family structure for insurance, your communication, where you stay, your documents for verification and ID. So there's a huge amount of information that you're actually giving your employer, which you're not giving anyone else. And what we're trying to really transform is how that data could be used to deliver a better experience. Because with 1/100th of the information that you give your employer, Netflix can still give you recommendations which your employer cannot do in the workplace, right?
Mhm.
So our idea is, how do we use that data that's sitting, completely unused within the organization, and how can you use that to deliver a better experience for each individual?
So can you walk me through an example of let's just say I'm working at Enterprise A, right? And I'm the human being. Enterprise is obviously the company I work for. What
Yeah.
you know what does that look like in terms of being able to use the data for both parties' benefit?
Yeah. So, it's simple things like, in most organizations, there is no ability to kind of use even simple data. Let's not get into the complex ones first, but simple data like your location, your designation, your work level, the department that you're going to be joining, and then architect a journey which is, unique to you versus me. If you're joining the New York office as a sales exec versus I'm joining the Dallas office as an operations exec, unfortunately, most businesses will kind of give you that same journey. And what we have been able to do is identify each individual based on all of these different data sets. So if Jim's joining as a sales exec, he needs to go through a completely different journey, which talks about the products that he's going to be selling, the systems that he's going to use to sell those products, the CRM, whatever it may be. Have an expense account because he's a sales exec. So have an expense account with $100, $100,000 limit, which is set up on Coupa or an Expensify or whatever it is. But me as an operations exec don't need any of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even those simple things are today manually managed because there's no system to understand where each employee is and what their data set is. Now, if you take it one step further, if you think about benefits, um, Tydy can actually understand that I might have a 1-year-old kid, and out of that 40-page benefits document, which no one's ever going to read, it can pick up the fact that, hey, a daycare service is one of the benefits we provide, and that might be important for you. That might be the top 5 benefits that are relevant for you, Kiran, right? So that level of experience is what kind of creates the wow factor, because now I feel that the organization is kind of molding itself around me rather than me having to go to 7 different places to find the data that I need or to find the information I need.
Yeah, that's an incredible value proposition. So when you think about that at scale, right? Once you guys have, 1,000 customers, which I'm sure you're right around the corner from, like what does that look like once you have all of that data at more of an aggregate level? Is there any ability to use that information for other purposes?
No, I mean, so a lot of the data is between you and your organization, right? So you're giving the organization um, the right to use that data for delivering a level of service. We can now pick that up and use that on a global level. That portability of employee data is still not there. Is that something that we're thinking about and speaking to people about 100%? But it's still not there today. That portability of employee data is still, I think, a couple of years off at least.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's really all about the customer relationship between employee and employer to your point,
correct,
right?
correct.
So when you think about some of the things you've had to overcome as a founder and some of your expertise, I'm sure there's still been some things that fit within, all that rich history of enterprise sales that you wish you knew ahead of time
Yeah.
in startup world or growth stage world, right? Are there any specific things that come to mind around revenue generation, around sales that you wish you knew earlier?
So I think one of the things that I really had to learn even after my 17, 18 years of experience was how to set up the sales engine from scratch, which is very different from going into an enterprise that already has a product that had people selling it, had some legacy behind it. Setting up the sales engine from absolutely nothing is quite a different challenge. And for me, that was something new, right? Yeah, I've set up teams in different cities and things like that, but again, there was legacy behind that, either as a product or an organization. But over here, there was no legacy. So setting that up to really be able to build that lead pipeline, whether it was SDR driven and with an AE kind of closing out the deals, that was a pretty significant challenge. It kind of took me some time to kind of figure that out.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that I figured that out in today's context of Tidy, but maybe, a year from now, as we kind of keep building, there will still be more learnings for me as I kind of continue to build that whole sales motion, either from a geography perspective or expansion perspective.
Did you bring on any folks to help you do that? Did you figure it out on your own? Did you bring in a, CRO internally? Like, how did you go about figuring out the mastery of here's exactly how we're going to go to market? Here's how I'm going to bring on my first and then second and then, 10th salesperson and so on and
Yeah.
so forth.
No, so I think bringing someone early on is probably not the best thing to do. The only reason is unless you as a founder have figured it out, it becomes very tough to translate that tribal knowledge unless you already know it, right? And so I think what we did was I started by doing everything on my own. Kind of brought in a couple of junior folk to kind of support me from an SDR perspective, outbound emails, whatever it may be. But the whole sales motion was something I kind of focused on figuring out myself. Um, once you do that, the initial sales have to be founder led, as everyone says. It just makes sense because, as I said, you need to know what the basic mechanics are in order to know which levers to pull to scale. The next stage is where it's founder supported. So it's not founder led, but it's founder supported, where you have your AE and SDRs kind of clicking on their own, but the founder supports them to close out deals. And only once that's done do you kind of get into a CRO sort of world where you bring in a CRO with experience to start scaling that team. Because till then, you're still figuring it out. I would say we're still in that founder supported model still, and maybe we're still a year away from really bringing in a whole CRO organization and then setting that up.
I'm glad you say that because it's I have conversations on the regular with folks who have brought in a CRO too early, a VP of sales, whatever you want to call the title.
Yeah, yeah,
But really what it is at the end of the day is bringing in somebody else to figure out sales for you, to figure
correct.
out revenue for you. And that doesn't work. Whether
No,
you're a product led founder, a sales led founder, or a subject matter expert, you have that tribal knowledge, like you mentioned, and there is
yeah,
no replacement for that.
yeah,
And someone is just going to get frustrated coming in, trying to figure it out and be you and duplicate your results
yeah,
without your support
yeah,
and you driving
exactly.
it first.
And
So,
and it's not just about the sales, right? Because that tribal knowledge has to be fed into your product, has to be fed into your vision, has to be fed into a pivot if required from a product perspective as well. And so only you as a founder have that thought process and vision to really kind of let it feed back into all of those other processes. So it's not just
yeah.
about the sales. And I think that's why it's really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. All right, so bringing us back to people ops for 1 second, and then I do want to hop in to our founder five, which are five quick hit questions at the end here. But one question first. So, um, what do you think people ops is going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You pick, and how is Tidy preparing for it?
I think the whole concept of employee experience has become or will start becoming a distributed responsibility. I think it's no longer the gamut of HR to focus only on EX and improve productivity of the individual, but it'll become a shared responsibility across multiple teams. And really, that's what People Ops is trying to set up for, is that eventuality in 5 years' time where it's no longer HR who's the only one responsible for EX, but you have your managers, you have your IT teams, you have your admin teams, all of them who are coming together in order to be responsible for the experience of each individual employee. And so I think People Ops is a step towards that eventuality.
All right, I'm gonna drop my mic wasn't hooked up right here, I'd just drop it right now for you. So we need to turn at least one of those into a quote. All right, so lastly here, just want to close us off with the Founder Five. So 5 quick hit questions. First one is number one metric or KPI that you are relentlessly focused on.
Lead velocity, actually.
Nice. Top tip for growth stage founders like yourself.
Oh, I would say don't shy away from all the rough days. I think that's what really helps you kind of build a long-lasting organization. Yeah.
Yeah, because you got to be a lunatic to start a company.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Number 3, favorite book or podcast that's helped you to grow as a founder.
I really like The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I remember reading that eons ago now, but it's still kind of it's top of mind for me.
Nice. Awesome. All
Yeah.
right. Piece of advice that counters what would be considered traditional wisdom.
Um, Everyone says, when you start up, you need to start by going after the small and medium businesses. Challenge that if your product is something that an enterprise could use, and don't shy away from it, because enterprise can be a great feedback mechanism for you more than SMBs can in certain cases.
But if you've been building for 2 years and you still haven't sold a customer, you're probably selling up the wrong tree.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. 2 years is too long.
2 years is too long. Yeah, yes, indeed. All right. Lastly here, when you've accomplished all you set out to achieve, what's going to be the title of your autobiography?
I persevered.
I thought maybe it was going to be Tydy. I actually might turn that into the title of my autobiography.
Yeah, nice.
Although my fiance
That'd be
would tell me
awesome.
I'm the last thing from Tydy. But well, actually, she's my wife now. Wow, can't believe I just told
Oh,
her.
wow.
Anyway.
Excellent.
All
Congrats.
right. So I know we gotta close this off, although I've enjoyed it so much, Kiran. I just want to give you an opportunity here at the end for a little bit of self-promotion, since you've given so much to our audience today. What can anyone listening do to help you out?
I think I wouldn't be a true founder if I said sales, but anytime you could help me with sales, that's going to be awesome. But we're also hiring quite a bit. There are a lot of roles that we're hiring for, and we're continuing to grow while the rest of the tech ecosystem starts kind of letting go of people. We're going the other way. So please do go to our website, www.tydy.co. Look at the opportunities over there, and yeah, that would be awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, I encourage you guys, listen in, listen up, go to the website, and reach out to Kiran if you're in need of some offboarding and onboarding support from a tech perspective. Awesome.
Excellent.
You killed it today, Kiran. Thanks for everything, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jim. Pleasure.